This story took place 3 years ago, involving two brothers named Dylan and Mike. Neither of them could have imagined that their usual journey home would become endless. Dylan and Mike worked in a neighboring state. At the end of each week, they would come home to their parents for the weekend. One Friday evening, Dylan and Mike drove to their hometown. However, due to road repairs on the road they always took home, the navigator suggested a short detour via another road. The brothers didn't think twice and turned onto the road suggested by the navigator. They drove for about an hour on the detour until there was a click under the wheels and the engine of their old car stalled. "Oh no, it looks like the fuel pump," Dylan said, and turned off the engine. "Great," Mike replied. He looked at his phone and added, "And there's no signal here." The smartphones were silence, not a single bar of signal. The time on the smartphone showed 11:50 p.m. The nearest motel was about 12 miles away according to the navigation system. They found an old map in the car, as old as the car itself. The map showed a road through the forest that would cut their journey almost in half. "If we take the highway, we'll be driving until morning," Dylan said. "Through the forest, it'll take about 2 hours." "Are you serious?" Mike glanced nervously at the darkening thicket. "All right. I don't want to spend the night in the car." They took a flashlight and turned onto a narrow country path that led into a dense forest. At first, the road seemed normal. Leaves rustled underfoot, and occasionally an owl hooted somewhere in a tree. However, soon the path began to change, and the air around them became different, as if moisture hung in it. A strange feeling arose that the forest was breathing and listening to their footsteps. After walking along the path for a long time, Dylan looked at his phone. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was 11:55 p.m. "That's impossible," he gasped. "We definitely walked longer than that." "Maybe we strayed from the path," Mike suggested. However, they hadn't turned anywhere, and they couldn't turn anywhere, as the path didn't intersect with other roads. Moreover, the path now ran straight ahead, like a stretched rope, without any turns. It was as if they were being led by an invisible corridor. A few minutes later, they heard a sound that sent a chill down their spines. The brothers heard footsteps, but not their own, someone else's. Someone else was walking behind them, clear, measured, like a third pair of boots. They turned around and shone their flashlight, but there was no one there. Soon they saw a light ahead. The path led them to a small wooden house, as if from the last century. Warm light from a kerosene lamp shone through the curtains. Dylan knocked firmly on the door. The wooden door creaked open. A gray-haired woman in a long gray dress stood on the threshold of the house. "Lost?" Her voice sounded soft, but there was something empty in it. "Our car broke down." "Can we wait here for a while?" Mike asked. "Of course, come in. The forest is dangerous at night." Inside it smelled of hot bread. A steaming teapot stood on the table. The hostess introduced herself as Mrs. Eldrich. She treated them to herbal tea and listened attentively to their story. However, the longer they sat, the stranger the time seemed. The clock on the wall showed exactly midnight, and the hands were not moving. Dylan glanced at his phone. 11:59, just like half an hour ago. "Mrs. Eldrich, what year is it now?" Mike suddenly asked, without really knowing why. "Which one do you need?" She smiled slightly. Something about her smile seemed wrong, too calm, as if it were painted on. "We need to go," Dillon said decisively. The woman did not object. She only wished to return home before dawn, before the forest changed its mind. When they left the cottage, the light went out like a lantern being extinguished. When they turned around, the old cottage was gone. Dillon and Mike looked at each other, not understanding how this could happen. However, they had no choice but to continue on their way. The path led forward again. However, now the trees looked different. The branches were intertwined in bizarre arches. Underfoot, strange black dew glistened in the lantern light. When they looked back, the path disappeared, replaced by thick undergrowth and trees. After walking about a mile, they heard the ringing of a bell. At that moment, Mrs. Eldrich emerged from behind a thick tree trunk. Only now her dress was black, and her face was eyeless, smooth as a mask. "You're still here, so the forest has chosen you," she said in a hollow voice. She stretched out her arms, and a loud ringing sounded around them, as if from thousands of invisible bells. Mike and Dillon jumped up and ran. They ran without looking where they were going until they suddenly jumped onto the side of the road. They found themselves right in front of their old car. The doors were open. The headlights were on. It was as if they had never left their car. They jumped into the car in terror. Mike turned the ignition key and the engine purred smoothly. Their phones picked up a signal again. 11:59 p.m. Without saying a word, they drove away. The road behind sank into darkness as if nothing had happened. An hour later, the lights of their town came into view. The fear had passed, but their hearts were still pounding. Dillon looked in the rearview mirror and froze. Mrs. Eldrich was sitting in the back seat, right in the middle. Her gray dress blended in with the shadows, but her empty eye sockets glowed with the soft moonlight. Mike turned around abruptly. The seat was empty. However, her figure was reflected in the rearview mirror in the back seat of their car. "Is this a glitch?" he barely managed to say. Dillon wanted to answer, but suddenly noticed that the road had changed. Instead of the familiar city streets, they were surrounded by the same endless forest. The navigator confidently announced, "Continue driving through the forest." Time remaining, 2 minutes. The next morning, Wayne County Police found their car on the side of the road. The engine was running. The doors were locked. Dillon and Mike were not inside. The navigation system kept repeating the same message, "Welcome home." After that incident, no one saw Mike and Dillon again. The search for them continued for several years. However, the search yielded no results. Their disappearance remains a mystery.